Welcome back to the Performance Process Podcast. My name is Ronan McLaughlin and I will be your host for today's episode, which we're going to use to take a deep dive into some of the optimization and some of the tech trends around this year's cobbled classics. In the first half of today's episode, we will speak to the crew from Specialized, who I had the opportunity to join on a sort of a recon ride of my own on Carrefour de l'Arbre, one of the famous cobbled sections from Paris-Roubaix. And we had the chance there to sort of go through some of the process that the team there used to optimize their World Tour riders ahead of Paris-Roubaix. And in the second half of this kind of lengthy episode is a follow-up conversation with JP Ballard of Swisside, who of course joined us on the podcast for a trilogy of episodes earlier in the year and is back today to sort of wrap up the classics campaign and again take a closer look at some of the optimization that happens, some of the reasoning behind the bike choices that we're seeing in Roubaix these days. We talk whether or not we're ever going to see suspension again at Roubaix, and if that is still the optimal setup, if it could be done in an aerodynamic way. And yeah, we touch on everything from that suspension conversation to tires to all sorts. So yes, enjoy today's episode. And with that, we will jump across now to my conversation with Specialized, recorded on the eve of Paris-Roubaix. Bit of a special episode today because I'm coming to you from Kortrijk in Belgium, and I've got round the table here with me four different individuals from Specialized. I've just spent the day trying to optimize Roubaix bike with said individuals, and yeah, just about halfway through the fifth or sixth time over whatever cobbled section, I happened to be getting battered by. I had the wild idea that might be a good idea to sit down and record a podcast, and a couple of hours later, we're now sitting here. That means I've had no time to prepare, and so we don't really know where this podcast is going to go. But I kind of thought with the changes in Roubaix in recent years, where we no longer see huge suspension systems, we no longer see cantilever brakes, we no longer see crosstop brakes, all the stuff that used to make Roubaix exciting has kind of disappeared. And what we more often see these days is the bikes that teams are riding week in, week out throughout the rest of the season are the same bikes that they're riding at Roubaix. And I thought this group would be a good group to sort of delve into that discussion with. So rather than me blabbering on for too long, I might just go around the group here and get each person to introduce themselves. Although you've got the mic there first, so we'll maybe turn to you first for the introduction.
Thank you for having me here. I'm Oliver Kiesel, working in the tire department at Specialized, and responsible for road tire development, and also for the team support for all our global pro athletes. And being there a couple times a year with them, testing materials, testing new prototypes, driving developments with the team, with the dedicated tire team, and optimizing their setups to have the most confidence on the start line.
Cool. Good stuff. And we were talking tires last night, so I think we'll maybe delve into that conversation again. We could probably dedicate an entire episode to that, but we'll come back to tires in a bit.
My name is Jeff Meyer. I'm the Reval engineering manager, and I work across all the disciplines that Reval covers for wheels.
My name is Chris Weehan, and I'm the product manager for Reval, really focused on more of the road and gravel side of things.
My name is John Cordoba, and I'm one of the road and gravel product managers at Specialized, mainly focusing on Future Shock bikes.
Cool. Thank you, folks. I want to just kickstart this by saying this is not a sponsored podcast in any way. This is not an advertisement in any way. This is just as I said, random idea I had today on the ride. So I think the first question I want to put to the group here is just, why is it that the bike dedicated to Roubaix, the Specialized Roubaix, is not the bike that the World Tour teams will be using this weekend?
Yeah, what we've seen over the past few years, I would say probably over the past 4 or 5 years, is the race has gone significantly faster. The speeds that they're going into the cobbles just have gone really fast. And riders are fighting for position, trying to get to the cobble sectors. There's only 60 kilometers of cobbles, and the riders are willing to sacrifice performance over the cobbles to just ensure that they have the fastest bike on pavement, and they can kind of duke it out to be the first ones to get into the cobble sectors. And that's what we've been seeing.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing that John had said the other day to us was, and just kind of framing this up, was you don't win Roubaix on the cobbles anymore. You lose Roubaix on the cobbles, but you win Roubaix on the roads. And I think that kind of reflects the fact that the speeds and choices of equipment has changed.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you, is it a case now that you're no longer optimizing to win on the cobbles, but you're optimizing to get onto the cobbles first? Is that kind of the way it's gone?
Yeah, that's pretty much how it's gone. I mean, I can just have a couple of stories from the development of our road bikes. The first one is back in 2019 when Philippe Gilbert won on the Roubaix. We had a little download after the race with the riders, and even though they won the race, we asked them, "Hey, what can we do for the next generation Roubaix to make it better for you?" And the one thing they came back with is, can we get a more Aero bike? They just wanted a more Aero bike. And then the other one is this past fall, we were doing testing with a couple of the quick-step riders with Yves and Casper. And they came back saying they loved how the Specialized Roubaix handle on the cobbles, and they were willing to give up that comfort and confidence that the bike gives them on the cobbles in order to have something that's faster on pavement to get them, be the first ones to get onto the cobbles. And that's, when your paycheck depends on your equipment, you're willing to make those sacrifices.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing is Jeff, our engineering manager for Reval, was actually just with the teams, and this podcast will clearly come out after Roubaix, so it'll be interesting. But, you're with the teams and they're riding different product, and, they were trying different front wheels, and it was the feeling, I guess you could tell the story better than I, but it was the feeling, how fast can I get into the cobbles was what they were trying to optimize for.
The interesting optimization of speed through the whole race and maintaining durability, like in the rough sections. Like we've gone away from the comfort in the rough sections to making your super bike, your fast bike survive the rough sections and get you through to the next section of pavement. And yeah, they're still willing to try out different equipment to get there, and just searching for basically every watt and the durability that they need.
Even to the point where they're willing to give up some Aero for lower weight wheels for the acceleration and the inertia, right? And so it's this like crazy highly optimized problem that, literally today, they're still working through, and Jeff is with them for that.
Yeah, that one thing you mentioned there about the Aero and the inertia, I want to get back to when we discuss wheels a little bit later. But I guess the obvious question from everything that's said so far is just the Roubaix is not as Aero as the SL8. Is that correct?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. Even though this latest generation Roubaix SL8 is our most Aero Roubaix we've made, it's actually more Aero than the first Venge that we made back in 2012.
Okay.
So we're about 4 or 5 seconds faster than that first generation Venge.
Over
40K.
Okay.
And yeah, the riders are looking at even more speed from the bike, but also the developments that went into the Tarmac SL8 allows the riders to choose that bike for a race like Roubaix. There's a lot more comfort coming out of the Tarmac SL8 for them, and they also can fit a bigger tire that is also going to give them more comfort throughout the race.
I'm thinking this must be killing you because you're Mr. Roubaix and you're telling us that the Tarmac is faster at Roubaix, but is it that tire clearance that has opened up the option?
Part of it is the tire clearance, yes, and also the other part is, when you're a professional rider, you can suffer through some of the things that Roubaix presents. I mean, you experienced the cobbles today. Would you ride a Tarmac SL8 on the Sportive?
I mean, the last time I rode these cobbles was on a Dogma F. So very, as by no means a Roubaix-specific bike, although it did win Roubaix a few months after that. So I don't know what that tells you about me, but I think what I noticed today was that we just ran out of time and didn't get to the wider tires, but lower and lower pressures seemed to be what was making the biggest differences. Time and time again, as I dropped the pressure, I got more and more confident. And that was with 32 mil tires. So if I can't recall off the top of my head what the clearance is on a Tarmac SL8.
Yeah, Tarmac is 32 millimeters would be the biggest tire.
And so that's why I'm thinking for the pros who, can ride cobbles better than any of us, if they've got that option to get the tire width in there, that's probably the biggest leap that they can make.
Yeah. And then, for the rest of us that are riding to enjoy, we can choose a bike that is going to help us have a good time on the cobble, have a better time on the cobbles, I should say.
Yeah, so I should say that part of the group that we're with here today is actually going to ride the Sportif tomorrow. Unfortunately, I can't because it clashes with the women's race. But if I was going to race tomorrow, we spent a lot of time setting up the Roubaix today, trying to optimize it as best we could. We looked at different springs in the Future Shock. We also ended up adding a couple of different tokens in there or spacers to stiffen it up a bit. And then we looked at a lot of tire pressure. Can you just talk me through what that looks like? So I've seen what it looks like today for Joe Soap. What does that process look like for the pros when it comes to optimizing for Roubaix?
Yeah, for optimizing for Roubaix, it starts back in October. And it starts with the initial test on trying to figure out what is the best bike that's going to suit each rider. And we do a lot of the stuff that we did today where we start off with a particular air pressure, mostly what they ran the previous race. And then we start playing with lower pressures and see how they feel on it. Mm-hmm. We also change, in the case of a Roubaix, a Future Shock springs and add preload spacers to see if that's going to help them feel better over the cobbles. And
so it is a case that they're actually riding both bikes back to back, because that was one thing we didn't get a chance to do today was
yes. Yeah, they're riding, in the instance for the test we did in October, they're riding Tarmac SL8 and Roubaix SL8 back to back and trying to figure out. They're also riding different wheels and tires back to back. So whereas a repeat wheel or a Terra wheel or turbo 28 or 30 tire versus Mondo 32, all these are being ridden back to back. And maybe Jeff can, since he is fresh in his mind from his test today.
Yeah, you were on a recon today. We're recording this on Friday afternoon, so the day before the women's race. It was Quick Step you were with today.
I was chasing Quick Step around about half the course, and it pretty much started out rainy and dried up kind of by the end of it. But yeah, like today, one of the things they were looking at was 32s or 30C tires. Okay. And yeah, there might be like a watt on the table for changing your front to a 30C tire. But we've done a lot of lab testing, and we know that there's also a trade-off there in pinch flat performance. And obviously there's some trade-off in comfort too. So yeah, those are the things that they're experimenting with. And then the team can give them the data to say, like, here's either the benefit or the risk of changing your equipment.
Just talk to me a bit about that. So I guess the first question is, which tires are they looking at? Is it Mondo? Is it the Cottons? Or what?
Mondo 32C. Mm-hmm. And then they were also experimenting with Rapid Air 30C.
Okay. And when you say testing and experimenting and lab testing, is that like rolling resistance and power meters and aero sensors, or is that like I did today, is go out, see how it feels, come back, report, change it, check how that feels?
Yeah, it's going to be more of a go by feel and repeated. Like when we did the October recon, we had one loop that they were doing. And so it was fairly controlled. They had one warm-up lap, and then we were changing one thing per lap. Usually we even try to keep it to the point where you're only changing like your front wheel, like not a wheel set. Just change one factor for each lap to try to get controlled feedback. And then all of the data comes from our lab testing. So like Ollie would have the rolling resistance. We can get the aerodynamic drag from our wind tunnel. And then in the lab, we have pinch flat testing and anything else that's going to be a factor in what they want to pick.
I might just ask Ollie just about that lab testing. And we had the Mondo on today. It's an endurance tire, but how do you then assess do you look at if the benefit that will bring on the cobbles in terms of extra robustness make up for whatever loss I'm perceiving there would be from endurance tire versus an outright race tire on the tarmac sections?
Yeah, that's the interesting question, basically, especially for tires in Roubaix, because this is quite a stretch goal. No? It is a long race, it is a tough race, and it's also a fast race. So efficiency is very key, but also the durability of the tire. You have a very fast 100k kilometers on normal pavement, where rolling resistance and also aero drag plays a significant part on the efficiency to the rider. And then there comes the rough part, where you can destroy the whole race if you basically puncture in the first sector, and it takes in Roubaix a while to basically get to a spare wheel or to a spare bike to follow the group again. And if it happens in the wrong moment, your race is basically done. So it was also always an approach from the teams, and it was also Jeff touched on the durability of the wheel and tire combination as a whole, especially also in terms of pinch flats, of course, especially since we had the opportunity to race tubeless to the modern technology. It became a big part of the focus in the development to optimize the wheel and tire setup for that as well.
So effectively it's coming down to, again, not losing it on the cobbles rather than trying to win it on the cobbles.
Correct. But still, as I said, efficiency is still key. That's also where we look on in rolling resistance tests, and also doing tests in velodromes and controlled and more realistic area to do really honest back-to-back testing on certain setups, tire pressure also, or if for potential inserts affect the rolling resistance and the ride quality as well. So there are a lot of things what are also secret at some point get tested. In terms of tire width, of course, we all know that disc brakes was basically the game changer for bike designs and gaining more tire clearance to the bikes. And usually in Roubaix, most of the teams ending up with the widest tire size they can run in the bike. The wider tire allows for a lower pressure, what adds comfort and helps to flow over the cobbles, but still have or maintain rolling efficiency. But also with the larger contact patch you get, you have not just a bigger contact patch, but also a longer contact time, what helps you also with grip and control.
Okay.
To basically, especially when it's wet, to keep you upright on the bike, keep you in control, but also saving energy if you are confident.
You've mentioned pinch flats a couple of times. I want to come back to that, but just before we do, I'll maybe put it to the table. The rule of 105, how important is that, do we think? And we spoke about it earlier. Is that a consideration for Roubaix, or is it a point at Roubaix where just wider is better, and regardless of what size the rim is, the extra pinch flat protection, the extra puncture resistance, the extra grip sort of outweigh the 105 or the aerodynamics of the rule of 105?
Super good question. And as you and I talked about, the rule of 105 is kind of around that ratio between tire and to the rim shape to drive aerodynamics. And, I guess for our point of view, right, it's a starting point, right? It's definitely not exact. Every tire size, in a perfect world, in the situation you're in, would have its own rim. Because it would definitely tweak and differ given the tire size, tire pressure, and what you're trying to do, given course and wind angles. So I think specifically for Roubaix, for us in Reval, we have a repeat front wheel that is actually quite wide and substantially so compared to many other wheels on the market. And so when you start to talk about tires that are in 30, 32, or even into the 35 range, because the width of that wheel is so wide, it actually helps to reattach airflow. And so it becomes still a meaningful aero advantage versus, say, a narrow wheel where you start to negate that aero advantage a little bit more due to the size of the tire. And so just an example for us, right? Like going to a repeat front for our teams versus, say a shallower wheel, even with the wide tires could yield, 3+ watts even at their speeds.
So that's kind of the width and the depth of the rapide.
Yep.
Just helps regardless if the tire is outside the rule of 105.
Yep.
It's the rim is there to
reattach the airflow.
Whereas if it was super narrow or super shallow,
yep,
it's hidden behind that larger tire. Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And then, for a lot of it, right, aerodynamics is driven off the front of your bike. We see that obviously with Tarmac SL8 and really how we designed that bike and how we think about performance stuff in the future. And so again, what you'll see into Roubaix and some of the stuff we've been looking at, right, these guys have been testing with the teams for, over a year now. We do a lot of lab testing as well as wind tunnel testing and on the road testing. You start to see some interesting combinations again, that highly optimizing way. So whether it's a 30 or a 32, the wheel set, are you running a shallow front, a shallow rear, or a deep front, shallow rear? You really allow the riders to fine tune to their style. And I think that's an interesting thing. And Jeff kind of touched on it, which is we give them all the data, they do all this stuff. The teams themselves, and Quickstep in particular, give them data. And it's up to the rider to make the call for them and the way they think they're going to ride the race and their goals within the race. Somebody who's there to get a team leader through most of it may pick a different setup than the team leader.
How much do you watch them picking different setups and think there's a negative spiral there where they've gone for too wide or too narrow a tire and too high a pressure, and they've gone for a shallow rim, and you're tearing your hair out at some point?
Well, I can't speak for my teammates and my colleagues here. For me, I would say there's a bit of excitement in that, like trying something new and you get excited, and then there's that little piece that sits in this pit of your stomach. You're like, oh crap, I hope we're right. And then you find out on Sunday.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of both. It's that excitement that they're willing and they trust us so much and they're willing to try new stuff. And then a little pit in your stomach is like, did we do enough?
Okay. We mentioned pinch flats a couple of times. Can we just tell listeners what, because I've heard about it already today, but what are you referring to when you say pinch flat? Yeah. What are we talking about there?
Yeah. Pinch flats are that classic snake bite where you get your tire caught between your rim and something hard. So like in Paris-Roubaix, that's hitting a cobble at whatever 50 kmh, and then basically your tire loses the battle between the cobble and your rim trying to meet up with each other. We do that. Replicate.
Which is still a classic and a clincher inner tube setup, but still a concern with tubeless.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The tubeless setup is only a benefit because if you have a pinch or a puncture, the tubeless sealant will seal it and you can continue riding after only losing some pressure. Back in the tube days, there was more of a one and done deal. Like once you get that pinch flat, then you're going to have to stop and put a new tube in, or if you have a team car, get another wheel. So yeah, we still want to prevent that moment when you're stopped trying to do a wheel swap. And we quantify that through pinch flat testing, and we do it on our drop impact rig. We have a drop impact rig that we use for our impact strength testing, and that's a falling anvil coming down centered on a rim and a steel dummy fork, a rim and a tire and a steel dummy fork. And we basically will select one tire and one pressure to start with and start at a low height, and we keep increasing the drop height until we're pinching the tire or the tire and tube. And we'll repeat that to get some of the variation out of the data. And then we'll do that across various wheel models, various tires, various pressures. And we end up with a pretty big matrix, knowing where those combinations are going to pinch flat and which ones are stronger or more resistant to pinch flat.
And you're using various different strikers as well, is that?
That's correct? We just have one striker.
Okay.
It's kind of like a piece of angle iron pointed straight down. It has a 2 millimeter radius on the leading edge, so it's pretty sharp.
Okay. And yeah, you said through a range of different pressures.
Mm-hmm.
So what then, like, what are you bringing from that knowledge into Roubaix this weekend to reduce pinch flats? Is that something specific to Roubaix or what's?
Yeah, sure. So like if this wasn't really on the table, but like alpinist front versus rapide front. Like the alpinist is very thin. The pinch flat performance doesn't match the rapide front, which has those really wide hooks. So like that's an obvious decision. But or like 30 versus 32C tires. Like if you might consider what pressures you would run for each tire, and then we can look at our chart and figure out which one is going to have more pinch flat resistance.
So it's the width and the size of the hooks that
has a lot to do with it. Okay. The stiffness of the rim also has a lot to do with it. If you have a softer rim, you can absorb more energy.
You've mentioned Rapide and Alpinist there, but do you want to tell me which wheels they will be running this weekend? I already know, and this podcast, I'll remind you, is coming out after the race, so feel free to tell me now.
So again, I'll just say we give our teams as much data as possible. We work with them, and everybody is going to choose the setup that's right for them. So I'm going to talk in generalities because there's still at least for the men, there's still a day. For the women, they're probably set. I would hope so. It's only a couple hours away. But for the most part, our quick step is going to run Rapide fronts and Terra rears. And they're doing that, as Jeff mentioned, to improve pinch flat protection on the rear, where our Terra rim is a little wider, a little bit bigger bead hooks. And it's also shallower, that it allows that inertia to play a factor. So that acceleration, lower inertia, better acceleration. So again, we talk about getting into the cobbled sections, accelerating out of the cobbled sections. The inertia is a big thing. As far as tire choice, they may go between some riders in 30, some riders in 32, again, just given what they're targeting. When we look at some of our other teams, Bora or SD Works as examples, they're been really happy and really enjoy the Aero performance of just an entire Rapide setup. And they feel like they're willing to gain a little bit more in Aero. They're not as concerned about some of the accelerations, but they just want the flat Aero, and so they'll go sets of Rapides. Okay. And so it does really kind of vary by a team. And again, how they think the race is going to play out for themselves. Like, where is their moment to shine?
So if I'm hearing you right, and I don't know the Terra dimensions off the top of my head, but from what you're saying, I'm assuming it must be wider than
it is.
Rapide
Yeah,
wheel.
so Terra's our all-road wheel. So it's a 25 internal versus Rapide and Alpinist are 21. The bead hooks are a little bit wider, which is, to Jeff's point, helping with that pinch flat performance. And it's a slightly more durable rim for us. So again, having it on the rear makes a lot of sense. And that is something we've tested in the tunnel. We've done a lot of the pinch flat performance data on, and was a recommendation we had to the team. So we're excited to see them try it out. But again, it's going to be really dependent on how they perceive the races to play out, which is why you see SD Works specifically kind of going with a full Rapide setup, because for them, the acceleration in and out, like they're one of the strongest teams, right? They're going to be at the front. They don't have to fight as much as some of the men's teams. And so they know they're going to be in front. And so it's pure speed going in, pure speed going out. And so the way they're interpreting the race is going to be different.
It's kind of, it's a little counterintuitive in my head, in that you want to be faster to get into the sections at the front, but you're opting for the less Aero wheel in a Terra versus a Rapide. It seems a bit...
Yeah.
And we're only talking about the back wheel here, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
And that really comes down to the low inertia and that acceleration. And so when you look at just, at your acceleration phase, like getting up to max speed or whatever max speed is going to be, actually lighter weight rims are going to allow you to get to max speed faster over Aero. In those moments, the lighter weight wheel wins. But, once you've gotten to max speed, and it's about maintaining speed. And so for the men's race, where it's fighting an acceleration after acceleration to get to the front, to make it sure you're on the cobble section first, to get out of the cobble section first, to close the gap, the low inertia could play a massive factor for them. Versus, again, SD Works being one of the strongest teams, like they're perceiving their race to play out slightly different, where they're going to control it. And if they're controlling it, they're not creating all those accelerations. It's a different dynamic.
I was at the start of the Vuelta last year in Barcelona. It was at City Centre Circuit, and there was loads of 90-degree corners in that. And I'd asked one team's performance engineer, or I can't remember his exact title, but I'd asked him at the time if lighter wheels on that course would make for better acceleration out of the corners and that. He was kind of walking away as I asked him, and he just said something like fake news or something, which I took to mean that inertia isn't really a factor, but what you're saying here is that you Specialized believe it is. Yeah,
I'd say yes, on the Reval side, and we do believe it is a factor. We believe that it's an important factor, and it's something that we're definitely keen to understand.
I think we spent quite a bit on wheels and tires. They are obviously the most important, the only part of the bike that actually touches the ground, and in a place like Roubaix, that's obviously a very important thing. Is there anything else that, before just to move on to like the frame and other aspects of a Roubaix setup, that you think I've missed there in terms of tires? Is there anything like, obviously some of the news this year has been around hookless versus hooked, rims breaking, tires dismounting. What you told us this morning actually was that, in Roval's opinion, a tire should stay on the rim and allow you to get stopped.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably an awesome second podcast we can all follow up on. We'd love to do it. But yeah, in essence, we believe for high pressure road racing, hooked is better. Mm-hmm. We have hooked rims, and it's for a whole host of reasons. That being said, whether you're hooked or hookless, the answer should not be your tire coming off. Simple.
And just one other thing on that matter, because it would be a podcast of its own. But all you were telling me last night about the bead material, it makes for a tire that's more difficult to get on, which for years I would have been complaining about. But as we move further and further into hookless systems, I think I'm now personally at the point where if a tire's easy to get on, it's probably one I'm not going to choose. Do you want to talk to me a bit about that?
Yeah, it depends also a bit on your wheel and tire combination. Our tires are pretty made to get pretty good on and off on rims what are designed according to ETRTO norm to the standards, which works great for us, and where we stick to it to have max compatibility across all the wheel brands in itself. But we also want to have maximum compatibility and, of course, safety, and also have optimized also for tolerances what are given to the ETRTO to have good blow-off performance and rider safety in our tires. So there are also, it's the bead shape, the bead diameter, but also the bead material. What makes a difference here to install the tire, dismount the tire, but also have a solid blow-off performance and rider safety to it. For our tubeless tires, we decided to use a stronger, also more expensive material to address this topic, to also ensure a safe combination if you use the tire on a hookless rim. Even we don't offer them for our road or gravel wheels, but our tires are designed to use on them, also tested to use them, and approved on them.
Can you tell us what that material is in the bead?
It's Cylon.
Okay.
Usually you use aramid. There are also carbon materials available, but the standard material, what's also used in clincher tires, is aramid. Mm-hmm. And Cylon is a stronger material with lower elongation, stretch under pressure. So it remains longer or can hold more elongation until the tire blows off, basically.
Okay.
But it's also more expensive material, and it's a cost in your tire.
I don't think we'll spend too much time on the frames, because I dare say the Specialized crew in front of me would probably recommend a Specialized Roubaix or a Tarmac SL8. So, we've already touched on why the pros are going for an SL8. I myself was on the Roubaix today. I do want to ask you about other components on the bike though, because presumably you're involved in all of those setups with your teams. That last time I referenced earlier that I had ridden on the Roubaix cobbles, I was using deep profiled Aero handlebars. One piece bar and stem, and by the end of each sector my hands were on fire, at least felt that way. Is that something that pro riders are changing heading into Roubaix? Is that something that someone at home who's maybe thinking, I want to do Roubaix Challenge next year, and they've got one piece integrated setups, is a two piece better? Is carbon better? Is alloy better? What are you leaning towards for handlebars?
I can tell what I'm leaning on personally, but I think all of it is really rider preference. If I go back to the testing we did in the fall, we had this exact same conversation with Casper Asgreen.
Because Aero would come into it also. I'm thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
So, we were talking about Aero numbers, and we recommended, hey, if Aero is so important, why don't we have you ride the Rapide cockpit? And for him personally, he wasn't ready to give up the comfort from a round bar to go to our Rapide cockpit, which is our Aero bar system. Chris had a great point today. He's riding the Rapide cockpit and the one-piece cockpit, and for him, he feels more secure because there's no chance of your bar slipping from your stem when you're hitting those big cobbles at 40, 50K an hour.
I guess that maybe comes down to if you're someone who rides the cobbles on the hoods, more chance of that happening. Whereas if you're on the tops, probably less chance.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's also how comfortable do you feel riding on the tops if you have an Aero bar, right? It's going to be a little slippery. So you just got to make sure that you feel comfortable with your hands on there.
Anything else about the bikes or I guess the next question is double wrap bar tape. Is that still a thing, or is that have you ever tested if that is a benefit or not? Because there's a lot of debate out there about whether double wrap's better or not.
Well, that's kind of one of the reasons why we designed the Future Shock. If you have you don't need a double wrap bar tape with the Future Shock because you get 20 millimeters of travel. But my guess is, again, it's going to be rider preference, and yeah, some riders will choose double bar tape just to get a little bit of cushion.
Yeah, I could see you sort of wincing there as I was asking that question. I was like, does this guy not get what this Future Shock does? But I want to go back to the days where we have double wrap bar tape, we have cross top brake levers, and then the sort of the melding in the modern would be to add in some top shifters like the blips or the Di2 climb buttons, because that was actually on the cobbles today where I felt. I felt I could have been faster had I had cross tops and had I had blips on the tops, because first of all, coming to the corners, I was having to slow up to let the bike slow down naturally before I felt confident to move from the tops to the hoods. And that's not the fastest way to slow down. The fastest way to slow down is to get to the corner and brake as late as possible and then turn into it. And so that I felt there was a delay there. And then the other thing, and Peter Sagan was with us today, and he was sort of saying, look, whatever gear you're in, you're better to suffer through that and make that work than trying to reach across to shift gears. And then I was kind of thinking, well, we've got all this technology nowadays that we can shift from, up by the stem. Why not use it?
Yeah, and again, it's all rider preference for setups. Both Shimano and SRAM have the options of adding blips to your cockpit to wherever you had. I actually have SRAM blips. Additional buttons on my bars. The other one is just the brakes, and I guess that one's tricky.
Yeah, with hydraulic it is tricky. Now I think Shimano does offer a GRX option that would integrate. I'm surprised I haven't seen it turn up just for no other reason other than to make people aware that it exists. But perhaps we will this weekend. Yeah. Saddles and things like that, anything else changing or
saddles? I think for the most part, our riders are riding our mirror technology saddles, which offer a ton of comfort out of the saddle. So that's what most of our riders have been using.
I noticed a previous generation Roubaix out on course today, and there's an external seat clamp setup going on there, whereas the new one is different. It's still very different than the good old days where we had huge suspension forks and suspension on the rear end.
Yeah.
What's going on with the Roubaix there, and will we ever see full suspension setups come back?
No, I think the race has gone into the deep end of being fast, and I don't know that suspension will be a key factor in future editions of Roubaix. When we got asked by the Quickstep team in 2019 to make the Roubaix more aero, it goes again
with suspension.
What's that? It's hard to do with suspension, and it's hard to do aero and still give the rider comfort and confidence from suspension. They both fight against each other. So I don't know that we'll see suspension play a key factor in the future.
But yeah, I was out there today, and I was only thinking about the future shock and turning the dial and adding in the preload spacers and that. But actually, there's a bit of suspension of sorts happening at the rear also.
Yes, there's definitely we have the drop clamp and the pivot C-posts, which allow for the saddle to move in an arced.
Which I didn't have.
back.
Actually, I had the 0 offset post, so
We still get some movement on that.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
so you don't get as much movement as the 20 mil offset C-post, but you still get some movement out of it's more than not having the pivot C-post at all. But going back to what the right setup is, for us, that our paycheck doesn't revolve around winning a prestige race like Paris-Roubaix, and our skill levels are maybe not at the level of a pro rider. The Future Shock and the Roubaix technology really helps with feeling confident on those cobbles, being able to change lines midway through the cobbles, being able to stay on the bike. Whereas on a bike without Future Shock, it's definitely going to be a lot more challenging, and it's going to take more effort to get across the cobble sectors. And by the time you get over the cobble sectors, your hands are going to be killing you, and you're going to be slowing down the more you go into those cobble sectors.
Yeah, I had a Trek to Manny when I was here last year, and I've had the Roubaix this year. It's a few years ago now since I had that dogma on the cobbles, but I think that was one thing when I was riding around today. Would be really interesting to compare a more typical all-rounder bike like a Tarmac SL8 or something back to back with a Roubaix-specific bike like that, because it's kind of, you hop onto the cobbles. As I said earlier, there was a noticeable difference for me. The more and more I could drop the pressure, the more confident I felt on the cobbles. But it would have been interesting then to stick the final pressure I landed on, stick that same wheel set into a more traditional type of road bike and take that for a run to compare.
Yeah, we might have to get you a Tarmac before you
maybe
go
next
back
year.
home.
Maybe next year. I think we're running out of time here. We have an event to get to, but I think that's, having missed out on the Sportif tomorrow, we now have a year to fully optimize me, and we'll come back for next year's Sportif and see how well we can optimize for that. So. One thing I did want to ask you just before we do wrap up, do the riders' positions change anything on the bike? Because I set my bike up, not my bike, but the Roubaix I was riding today, identical to an Aero bike that I would ride at home. And I felt, and granted I am moving to an extremely forward and sort of nose down saddle position, which we discussed in one of the previous episodes of this podcast. And I felt that put me too far over the front. It was too aggressive. I had a lot of weight in the handlebars. And first time we came back into the sort of pit zone we had set up there, I put the saddle back about a 10 mil or so and felt much more confident then. Do the pros change? I'm guessing the pros don't change that.
So, yeah, from my experience in talking with the pros, the cockpit and any of the setups on the bike, they don't actually change. What they change is when they enter the cobbles, how they sit on the bike. And I was mentioning to somebody earlier today about how to enter the cobbles, and it's almost like you're trying to push your hands away from the bars and then really plant your butt on the saddle to allow that front wheel to unweight and be able to skip across the cobbles easier. And that's kind of what they do, but they don't, from my experience, they don't change anything on their setup.
That was really, you've hit the nail on the head there. What I was finding was that my front wheel was just like diving into every single cobble. And as soon as I got back a bit, I just felt like it was much smoother over the cobbles. Yeah. And then as I then progressed and decreasing tire pressure and changing the Future Shock and that, it was only getting better from there. I wonder how that might have compared if I had maintained my forward progressive saddle position.
Yeah. What did you think about the updates we did to your Future Shock? We changed a few things during your setup here.
So the things we changed were actually the only thing we changed was we put in the tokens or the
two preload spacers.
Preload spacers, yes.
Yeah.
And then I was playing about with the rotary dial while I was out on course. And certainly the first ride out, I think there was just a bit too much sag. I was just compressing a bit too much, and again maybe combined with that forward saddle position. But definitely what I was feeling was, I think I said to you, or I said to someone, I don't know if it's the tire and the rim bottoming out or if it's the future shock bottoming out, but something is hitting in a way it shouldn't hit here. And then we put in those preload spacers, and I didn't sense that again, and we didn't actually get a chance to change the spring in that. But and then rotating the dial, then I didn't feel a huge difference with that, but definitely I tried it on the softest, I tried it on the hardest, and then I landed in the middle. and kept it there.
Yeah, my guess is that by we added those preload spacers, you actually got higher up on the bars and you weren't sagging in too much, which also helped with going through the cobbles a little bit higher, and your wheel being able to skip through.
Yeah,
and not bottoming out.
At the time, I was wondering, was it the tire and the rim? But it clearly wasn't, because after that, I just progressively dropped the tire pressure lower and lower and lower, and wasn't having that sensation again. And on the last lap, I stopped about halfway around, and just we were using tire pressure sensors throughout. And on the last lap, I just stopped my own, and I just dropped the tire pressure a bit further, and happened to land on, we checked it whenever I came back, and it happened to land on 36 psi front and 36 psi rear, which I'm glad it wasn't my rims I was riding. But that was when I had the most confidence. As soon as I hit the tarmac, it was too soft. It was that old rule where you drop it until you feel too squishy on the road, and then you put it back up 5 psi. Yeah. I'm fairly confident had I put it back 5 psi, I would have been in a pretty sweet spot at that point. Yeah. So I finished up at around 3 bar, I think, well, whatever 36 psi is in bar, but I'd started at 3.5 front and rear. So yeah, I dropped considerably, but the sensation of bottoming something out had gone when we put in those preload spacers.
Yeah, nice. That's great.
Yeah,
that's the whole purpose of the new Future Shock 3.3, is that you can customize it to your rider needs.
Yeah, I mean, we had the camera on you when you were changing the preload.
I was a little nervous.
You were under pressure. I'm not sure if it's something that every customer could do at home, and it's not. I'm not sure, or is it like what it's Specialized taking that? Is that something you would be doing varying fairly often if you're changing terrains or something?
You would do it once and then never again.
Yeah, okay.
So you would do it at the initial setup, just to make sure that you have the right sag on your bike, just similar to a mountain bike. You set up your suspension and you never touch it again. Okay. Same thing with this. Riders could do it at home if they have the right tools. We have a video on how to do it, or your retailer can easily do it as well. So yeah, it's really easy. You saw it was just an Allen key and a couple of sockets, and that was it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. We're getting a nod here to hurry up and
wrap it up
and get going.
Well, yeah, no, just wanted to say thanks so much for having us. It was a blast.
Yep,
it's my first podcast, so I'm stoked.
Well, it was great having you. I think there was 2 different topics there you have promised to come back to and talk to us more about. So I'll definitely be on looking for those. I'll just wrap up just by reminding people that we obviously have 4 representatives from Specialized in front of us. So much of the conversation was focused on Specialized products, but this was not paid or sponsored or in any way. It wasn't a paid podcast in any way, because Escape Collective is entirely funded by our members, and as such, our members keep the lights on here. So it's for our members that this podcast happened today. I was riding around thinking that would be an interesting conversation, and part of what we promised when we founded the Performance Process podcast was that the conversations that I got the opportunity to have, I would bring to our members. So I think that was a fascinating conversation nonetheless, and thank you for joining us, folks. Okay, folks, so that was a pretty interesting conversation there with the crew at Specialized and some of the optimization that they're doing for their teams. But I also wanted to use the opportunity to sort of put a wrap on the classics and some of the optimization that's happening, and ask how relevant some of that optimization is for us racing and riding at home. And so I called up JP Ballard again, got him on the podcast, and what follows now is a conversation with JP just about a week, 10 days after Paris-Roubaix wrapped up, to discuss some of the work that he was doing with Decathlon AG2R Le Mondial and sort of tap into his aerodynamics expertise from his time working with brands, working with his own brand, Swiss side, and working with other teams and athletes. Now, unfortunately, if you are not an Escape Collective member, we are about to cut this podcast off. So if you want to hear the rest of this episode and the entire conversation with John Paul, then you'll need to head over to escapecollective.com/join and sign up today, off the back of which you will get you'll get an email telling you how to access the rest of this episode, and you will never have to do that again. These episodes will automatically populate into your podcast app of choice. And yeah, going forward, you can enjoy the entirety of Performance Process each and every episode. So without further delay, here is the conversation with JP. John Paul, welcome back to the podcast. It's a couple of months now since our trilogy, the lengthy series that we published and recorded in Adelaide and then published in the sort of weeks and months after that. So thank you for joining us again.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks, Ronan. Hello to everybody listening.
Thank you for joining us. And I mean, the reason you're back on the podcast is to sort of discuss the optimization trends around, well, the Spring Classics campaign. It's just sort of wrapped up now. I know we're in the middle of Ardennes week, but the true tech optimization around the classics has always revolved around the cobbled classics, and specifically around Roubaix. And what we've seen over recent years, and sort of all but confirmed this year, is that, yeah, the days of the Roubaix special bike seem to be almost done and dusted, to use a bit of a Roubaix pun. The race has now moved away from the likes of proper suspension systems and cantilever brakes and cross-top brakes that we've seen in the past towards just basically the same bikes that we see week in, week out. Is that, I'll kick off the conversation just by asking, is that a sort of a testament to the versatility of modern bikes, or is that an insight into the unique demands of World Tour racing on these cobbled races? And I guess the reason, just to explain why we've had you back in the show, is because you're obviously highly involved now with Decathlon AG2R. You were in Roubaix last week working with the team, so you perhaps have a bit of an insight into the sort of optimization that's happening around these races that we might not otherwise be aware of.
Yeah, the main reason we're seeing, in my opinion, the death of these cool innovations with suspension bikes and whatnot is quite simply the speeds that the guys are riding, and the appreciation now within the peloton of the power of aerodynamics. So, we see, riding 40, 45 kilometers an hour across the cobbles, you are so deep into the aerodynamic drag importance zone that you can't not be taking that into account. And so, we see, with example, with Canyon riding the Aero, is now what they're doing, and not riding a lighter weight, a more flexible bike. And the other point is you can get now with the disc brake bikes, with the wider tires and the lower pressures, these guys are riding 30, 32 millimeter tires at 3 to 3.5 bar. You get significant damping, and you get damping on the whole bike and rider system. So, you're getting damping directly on the road surface there. So in the optimal space, and as well, with more flexible cockpits, handlebars, flexible seat posts, you're getting enough suspension, let's say damping in the bike system now through those various areas, and which means you don't have to make the compromise on aerodynamics or weight by adding complex suspension systems.
Yeah, I guess the quasi-suspension systems that we've seen in the past have sort of been replaced by a different form of quasi-suspension in the tires, and that was kind of the most notable thing about Roubaix this year, was the sort of prevalence of 30 and 32 mil tires, even some 35 mil tires I spotted on Team Bahrain Victorious on the Sunday. I mean, those tire widths are hardly surprising, but with an average speed for Van der Poel of close to 48 kilometers per hour, which is just mind-boggling when you think about it. I'm sort of that those two things sort of leave me wondering what gives. I appreciate that 30 and 32 mil tires may be faster over the pave, but we hear so much and so often about the aero penalty of a wider tire and the rolling resistant penalty of a wider tire. How can they be riding both faster on the road and the cobbles with wider tires, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, look, and it's a really good question, and the answer is also clear. It's a compromise. So they are slower on the flat sections, non-pavé sections with the wider tyres. Like you say, when you're running 3.5 bar and a 32 millimeter tyre, you are slower, you've got more rolling resistance. But we know for a fact that the rollover resistance that you get going on these large macro obstacles as you get ploughing across these cobbles is so important. The difference, for example, compared to the old school days, running a 28 millimeter tyre, let's say not even old school, but not so long ago, running a
10 years ago, 28 seemed wide.
Yeah, totally. So, a few years ago, running a 28 millimeter tyre at 5 bar, you can, due to the fact the whole mass of the whole bike and rider system is jumping up and down on the cobbles, you can be losing 100 watts. We're not talking like 3 or 4 or 5 watts aero penalty because of a wider tyre. You're talking about 100 watts due to the effect of this rollover resistance, due to the fact that the whole mass of the bike rider system is being displaced up and down. And that's massive. So you're taking a deliberate penalty on the flats, on the smooth, let's call it, because there is just a massive gain to be had on the pavé, and that's the compromise that they're having. And ultimately, in looking at those sorts of numbers, 5 watts versus 100 watts, it's not the biggest compromise you've got to make. And coming back to sort of the aero trend and being faster thanks to the aerodynamics, the faster you ride the cobbles, the quicker you are as well. So if they can carry some of that speed due to the aero savings, the faster they're going to be across the cobbles, which means they're going to be faster across the cobbles. So it's kind of compounding the faster.
Yes.
So, Van der Poel, average speed, of course, in the dry, ideal conditions. I mean,
even a tailwind also, it has to be said.
Even a tailwind, it was really optimum for him. And honestly, I think the setup he had was optimum. And, coming down to sort of the team I'm involved with directly, which is Decathlonage des Airs La Mondiale, they're currently riding still the RCR bike, which is their kind of all-rounder aero but climbing lightweight bike. To be honest, I think with that bike, they still had a slight penalty because it's not a pure aero bike. So, I think it's something in the end we'll see in the future, at least in the next few years until the next crazy innovation comes. I expect to see all of the teams running the pure aero bike in the classics.
Of late, the trend has been for manufacturers to drop the pure aero bike, but am I hearing you correctly and you think we'll see a return to that?
Oh, I mean, 100%. I mean, we have seen a trend of dropping the aero bike. I mean, for me, based on the laws of physics, there's no reason that should be dropped. And I very much expect that we'll see the pure aero bike returning and being used most of the time.
Okay. Well, I look forward to that if it does happen. All right, folks, as we promised, that's where the free version of this podcast ends. If you want to hear the rest of it, as I've already said, head over to escapecollective.com/join and do those bits and pieces to become a member, to support what we're doing here, and to make sure these podcasts happen. Because as we said in the episode, these are not paid, these are not sponsorship, these are not promotional podcasts or recordings. These are simply the conversations that I have the opportunity to have that I want to bring to you. And as a member, also, please feel free to drop into the Discord channel and suggest what future episodes of Performance Process you'd like to hear, what conversations you would like me to have in future to help you with your riding at home. So with that, thanks for listening, and hopefully have you join us for the entire episode next time. Thank you.